So we are going to be examining the tensions that happen between Gloria Steinem and Bell Hooks. Now, the problem is that, as I've said before, I don't want to naturalize, but where men have this kind of dick measurement contest when it comes to every aspect of their lives, where it's like the little boys are like, well, I can shoot the ball this high. I can shoot the ball up to the roof. I can shoot the ball up to the sky. I can shoot the ball up to the moon. That kind of conversation where women generally have this agreeableness to their discussions with each other, and to find that kind of so when they've studied little girls and they talk to each other, they say stuff like, oh, well, I like the color blue. Well, I like the color blue too. You know, they do this kind of thing. I don't want to naturalize. I don't want to be like, this is the way that things play out. But I think it's important in this context, because to analyze this movement, we have to look at these little tensions that happen when these two people, the two queens of the conversation, are on stage and they aren't able to really take on conflict that needs to be talked about. Instead, they wash away conflict with these really simplistic ideas of intersectionality or whatever it might be. So that's the first point I wanted to make. The second point before I begin is just that, you know, our movements have been taken over by the loudest, most narcissistic, and really most traumatized people. And these traumatized people who see you, who essentialize the other. These traumatized people who can't see the human in the Nazi. And what happens is that they further polarize themselves from the Nazis, and the Nazis get stronger and stronger. That's what's happening today. The Nazis are getting stronger and stronger in the shadows. We say all this intersectional rhetoric. The new form of, you know, I'm not racist, but has become this kind of, yes, of course I agree with intersectionality, but then not doing anything actual in your actual life to combat racism and classism and sexism in your everyday life. You, in fact, do the opposite, man. This kind of thing in our everyday rituals matters, right? And it's fucking ridiculous, honestly. And I blame it all on Roxane Gay. This kind of Roxane Gay feminism and all of the neoliberal idioms, this hive mind where everybody just agrees with each other and repeats the same idioms. It's really disgusting. So I've gone so crazy over this that I've made like a 40 video playlist, and my next video is going to be about virtue signaling and how we need to take virtue signaling seriously. So Bell Hooks here is having a conversation with Gloria Steinem in 2014, and back then I remember looking at this video and just being like, yeah, I was one of those people. You know? Yeah, Bell Hooks. You know, it's funny because the left always criticizes the right as being idolizing people, when we do the same fucking shit. We do the same shit when it comes to bell hooks. I've been doing that for a very long time. And right, it takes a long time for us to actually criticize the people that, you know, we love. Let's get started.
And, you know, Eat, Pray, Love person has her own little store kind of now that you can buy the things from. And I think that's an ongoing tension, not just for white people, but for all of us in the United States, that we not presume to know the quote other, that we not presume that the other has so much to give us, and not ask ourselves.
So she's criticizing Eat, Pray, Love here.
I used to ask my students at Yale when they would say, well, I'm going off to Rwanda, or I'm going here, and I would say, well, what are you bringing with you?
And her answer is hospitality, mutual hospitality.
That you are going to see. You are telling me what you hope to get from them. And that in and of itself was a decentering of whiteness, a decentering of imperialism, to think, what am I bringing? So what are do you think those things when you're going off to India? She tells me, okay, she always gets on my case when I talk about her being 80. She actually has the nerve to tell me nobody would know she was 80 unless I told them.
But I never said that. I am the most public 80-year-old.
But wait. So Gloria tells me that what she wants to do for her 80th birthday is go to Africa and ride the elephant.
I did.
And I was like, that's really great. Send me a postcard. Because I won't be going to Africa to ride the elephants. But I want you to talk a little bit more about what has changed within you over the years as you have been so immersed in the lives and the causes of women of color particular?
Well, first I want to say something.
So this is Gloria is obviously trained by the CIA, because you can see that usually Bell Hooks is the one with the power in these interviews. And so she asks, because she's a prominent thinker and she's an actually very good critical thinker. But you can see how Gloria here, she sneaks her way past that difficult question that she's asked her by returning the question back to her. I'm sure this shit she learned from the CIA, okay?
I want to ask you a question. Where did the generosity of spirit come to look at me and not see the baggage of whiteness? Whiteness is...
So she took that difficult question and just made it about her, and unfortunately, she never actually answered that very difficult question that Bell Hooks asked Gloria in the first place, right? So she was so adept at this. I'm so sure she's totally either brainwashed and trained by the CIA here.
Absolutely right up there.
I mean, that's what the Dalai Lama talks about in Ethics for a New Millennium. When he says that we can perhaps do without religion, but we cannot do without the values of...
We can definitely do without religion.
And here's a critique of Gloria that I have, which, in fact, we can see that there's a rise in religiosity around the world, but not only that, but that our ideology, we have an ontotheological way of even perceiving the world. If you read from Kant to Hegel, I mean, there's a big discussion I'm going to be having with that, with regards to Frederick Jameson's work on the Hegel variations. And it's a very difficult concept of, can we do away with religion? From my perspective, from my philosophical perspective, there's no way to get rid of religion. Our institutions and even our framework for looking at the world, even our language, religion is embedded within our language. There's no way of getting out of that religiosity way of looking at the world. The best we can do is to have a way of analyzing different forms of theologies, different form of ontotheologies, and I think that's the way to not only solve the problem of the public sphere, but also get out of the neoliberal intersectionality that we've been so trained as academics to normalize and socially reproduce.
Okay. Now, the diehard Bell Hooks fans in this room know that I am deeply religious, deeply spiritual. So my buddy over here...
Spiritual is great. Religion is, we've had this discussion. Religion to me is something else than spiritual.
But some people want to have both, and want to have both in a progressive, loving kindness way. That was actually one of the topics as I went around saying, I'm going to talk to Gloria Steinem. What do you want me to talk to her about? And people said, well, you're really into spirituality, and she's very secular. That's one of the things that you could talk to her about. So let's hear, how do you get by at just being a secular person?
So, actually, Gloria has a really good analysis of the history of religion here.
I'm a spiritual person, but not a religious person. I really think, there was this smart guy named Henry Breasted who was an Egyptologist, and he was talking about the gradual process of withdrawing God from nature and withdrawing God from women over millennia upon millennia. But you can see, if you're ever traveling on the Nile, you can see in the sculptures and so on. And he says that monotheism is but imperialism in religion. When God looks like the ruling class, you're fucked, basically.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. It's something that I think that we have to really focus on in terms of decolonizing our religion, which is to look at the history of our religions, especially if you're from an Abrahamic background. That's a really good point that Gloria makes. But that's pretty much the only good point she makes.
Can't take it anymore. I can't get that white Jesus out of my head. And I was saying earlier that part of my own shift as a young woman to Buddhism was the fact that Buddha came in all colors, sizes, shapes, with all different kinds of expressions on the Buddha face. And I'm writing a piece right now for Shambhala's son about what does that collective imaging, what's the impact that it has on us as people.
See, now I'm going to have several problems with her idea of Buddhism. First is this continual strive towards focusing on performance and images in her work without actually following it up with action, with ritualistic action. See, and that's actually a problem I see with pretty much the whole of many of these movements, is that there's too much emphasis on words and epistemic changes without actually doing the hard work required to change our actions and our daily rituals. Okay?
Of color. In my house, there are way too many Buddhas. Because, you know, the way people find out you like something. And they were like, okay, Belle, I'm sending you a Buddha. But they're all colors. And some Buddhas I actually purchase from Ross Dress for Less. I tell people, like, I go shopping at Ross Dress for Less, and the Buddhas say, Belle, don't leave me here. I was never meant to live my life at Ross Dress for Less. And some of those Buddhas are the most colorful, gaudy, you know, reds, greens. But I feel like when I wake up in the morning and I walk about my home and I'm surrounded by these deities of many colors, it alters something within me. In the same way that I think Black people who have only had the opportunity to know white Jesus have something altered within them. I mean, that same church that had white Jesus had these rules. A female could not walk across the platform.
Just to situate this, she's talking about Western Buddhism that is so compatible with capitalism today. If you're interested in that, you have to look at the work of Slavoj Žižek and his critique against this kind of Buddhism. Secondly, what she does is she critiques this eat, pray, love that Gloria does with regards to her trips into India and Africa, or wanting to go to India and Africa to get the spiritual awakening that she needs to do. However, Bell Hooks uses a Oriental or, you know, Asian Oriental perspective to also do the same thing. And not only that, but this Asian Oriental perspective, which actually, you know, I study a lot. I'm a student of Confucianism, so I might even be doing this as well. But I am a critical Confucius. I see. Anyway, that's a whole other story. You should look at my Ritual Traces series if you're interested in that. Bell Hooks talks about her consumerism, talks about how consumerism and Buddhism go well together. And then she does this eat, pray, love thing with regards to that. However, if you look at the actual history of Buddhism, and if you go to the actual temples of Buddhism, which I think Gloria talks about a little bit, in the far reaches in like China and Korea, there's hardcore gender roles. And in fact, there are United Nations feminists who go into these far off regions, these far off temples, in order to instill a ethic of individual autonomy and intersectionality within these temples. But then they realize that even the women who have been trained in this intersectional logic still return to their Buddhist practices, still return to their gender roles. And then they ask, oh, why do they do that? It's because the ancestors are much, you know, the tradition itself is much more powerful than these Western traditions that are trying to force themselves into these far off regions. This is a form of neoliberal colonialism. What they do is they go into these far off cultures, they try to alter their traditions in order to become compatible with the Western way of doing things, with the idea of Western human rights and all of these things. But all they're really doing is lubricating those cultures in order to be penetrated. Sorry about the sexual stuff, but lubricating their cultures in order to be penetrated by the neoliberal colonialism. That's what they're doing. And they don't realize this. They are unwitting colonizers. Just like the anthropologists of the last 100 years were doing, today it's the progressive capitalists who are doing this. It's the progressive people who think that they are on a moral high horse. They are on a moral high horse as well. And it's so difficult to get them off of this moral high horse, to get off of their biased universality.
There was no crime called domestic violence. It was called life, you know. And the goal of the cops, the success in their view, was to get the criminal and the victim back together.
And now we're going to be talking about the destruction of the private sphere because of feminism, because of the personal is political, the destruction of the private sphere, which has, in a way, done the same thing that this far off colonialism has done. They started with their own backyard. And how they did that was because they're realizing that the way that you neoliberal colonize all of our minds is through the destruction of the patriarchy. And so how do they destroy the patriarchy? You see, one of the biggest faults of intersectionality is the assumption that patriarchy and capitalism are allied when they're clearly not. Okay, and this is why Gloria Steinem was necessary. Not only did they destroy the home and they brought the state into the home, which they brought the neoliberal state into the home to manage the household, right? And with this plea of domestic violence, with this fear of domestic violence, this vicarious traumatization of feminists who vicariously traumatize all other women in our society. This same logic is used for invading Afghanistan, invading the far-off reaches of the world. This same logic is used by Israel when they say that our people allow for, this was done 10, 15 years ago by the Mossad, that our people are open to homosexuality, for example, whereas the Islamic people, the Palestinians, are totally hostile to homosexual life. And you can see Israel actually went back on that because they realized that it's such an interesting tension here. But you can see, and if you're interested, please search how patriarchy and capitalism are not allied. It's one of my videos on this intense playlist I'm making.
Tell us more about what contemporary feminism has done.
Okay, so here you can see one of the initial tensions here, where Bell Hooks is not really convinced by this state that has come into our homes. So she has this critical thinking thought of challenging Gloria Steinem's argument of the Duluth model and the destruction of the home family structure by moralizing the commodification of emotional labor, by turning all of our interpersonal relationships into cost-benefit analyses that in fact destroy the love that comes to create this family. The love that requires the man to die to defend his family. Now the man no longer dies to defend his family. What you do is you call the police and the police come and intervene, right? And that kind of Duluth model has destroyed the traditional cultures within the West, and it is now the same logic that's being used to invade other cultures. So first we destroy our own traditions, and then we go off and try to invade other cultures with the same moralizing logic that's moralized by fucking Gloria Steinem, the CIA brainwashed and trained operative.
To intervene on that.
So
well, we've obviously
Hooks here is challenging Gloria on what she just said, because she knows that black communities have been destroyed by this kind of logic.
We've allowed the law into the house. There was jurisprudence up to then that said that it's more important to preserve the privacy of the household than it is to punish the violence or the crime that's going on.
So if you need proof that the patriarchy is dead, that's it. The patriarchy is done. Okay, so destroy this patriarchy fucking bullshit. That was the patriarchy, and it's over.
We allowed law into the household. We defined...
You've allowed the neoliberal state into the household, not only into the household, into our brains, to make every relationship that we have with one another an interpersonal relationship. And you are using the real fear of traumatized people. You're using that motivation to do this, right? And now traumatized people have taken over progressive movements completely. It's really scary.
Domestic violence, which actually I think is maybe not the right term. Maybe it should be original violence, because everything else follows that.
Or primal violence.
So then they follow up on this original myth logic that domestic violence is the original violence and all this stuff. This mythologizing, this feminist historical revisionism. There's a tension in Foucault with regards to this, which is whether this is a very difficult point to make, whether in our utterance of philosophical statements, we have already within them a political leading, which Foucault says we already do. We already have done this. But the problem here is when you overstate the political within your philosophical statement, what happens is you start believing in your own propaganda. You start believing in your own fiction. So yes, so then that's why feminists have all of these propaganda-like statements. Like, for example, if you agree with males being equal to females, then you are already a feminist. This is one of those propaganda statements. When a little bit of analysis requires you to realize that males and males are not equal. Right? And so they have all these propaganda-like statements within their political organizing. It's called the waterfall effect or something, where, I don't know, we were taught in, so you have to make a overboard statement in order to negotiate back into what you were actually trying to do. When in fact, what this does is people start to believe in the propaganda. They start to believe in this historical revisionism. And Derrida tells us what? Derrida tells us to be weary of origin stories. Or at least, if we're going to be putting out an origin story, at least say that this is a, bracket it and say that this is a, for example, origin story. But they don't do this. They start to believe in their fictions. And that's what all of this witch nonsense, this witch historical revisionism that's happening in feminism, in Instagram, and all of these things that are destroying our interpersonal relationships with one another and destroying the idea of solidarity. Look, if I, as a male feminist for 10 years, am unable to get on board, no man will.
Or primal violence. We've obviously, I mean, I don't have, you all know that, shelters are great. Obviously, women and kids shouldn't have to leave the house. It should be the criminal who leaves it. But,
and look at how they frame essentialize the male in the situation. They say he is the criminal, right? It's playing on these heartstrings. It's playing on these traumatized people who have a fear of their, what Grimes calls this, this vulnerability, this physical vulnerability that women have. And it's true that they do have, but they look at how they play on that. And they play on that in order to bring in empire into our interpersonal relationships. And they call it the personal is political, but when really what's happening is the personal is becoming pure capitalist, pure neoliberalism, pure neoliberal subjectivity. And they do it through pop psychology, they do it through academic institutions, through pedagogy, and they do it through so many different ways, through Instagram. It's fucking crazy.
This, I think we know the steps that we have taken, but what we probably still don't know, as I was saying earlier, is that this is the paradigm that normalizes other violence. We still see it as somewhat separate and apart and somehow not as serious, when in fact it is the seed of other violence.
When I work at a high school, a special high school for girls who have...
So here is, again, Bell Hooks pushing on. Bell Hooks is a real critical thinker, and this is why it's part of my tribute to her. This video is part of my tribute to her, is because although she's also played by these concepts, she has the critical analysis ability to counter it. And her death is really, it hits my heart truly, because she was the only one of these feminists, I think, that has the ability to really understand the process of complicity. She could have, steered these directions in the right direction, especially when, she says like these really controversial things that split the movement. Those kind of conflictual things that she says, like whatever she talked about with regards to Beyonce a while ago. She has the ability to bring in that critical thinking to the masses. That's the real loss here.
Committed violent crimes. What they express is a lot of glee in violence and happiness, as well as their love of cocaine or some other kind of drug that may have fueled their violent behaviors. And it has led me to question, have we in fact created a world where rather than men overall becoming less violent, females overall have become more violent, more willing to do harm to themselves, to ourselves, to children, to men in our lives?
Well, obviously we're dealing with trying to change norms here,
And this is, this type of debate that they have it's like 2 minutes of the whole fucking thing. And this is the kind of conversation we need to have. Conflict is our ritualistic sacrifice to the possibilities, our ritualistic offering to the possibility of common good. Hegel. Okay, Saul Nassau's interpretation of Hegel. Okay, we need conflict. Conflict is there. Conflict is not abuse. Sarah Schulman.
Which is huge, but some of it is if it's not going to change, I don't think, until men are raising children as much as women do, because that's the way that men become whole people, just like women.
I loved Bell Hooks' face. I agree with Gloria Steinem, but why don't men become housemakers? Why don't they? It's because we've heard it as all the time, this popular narrative that men are not economically attractive. It's because women refuse to understand or take down the patriarchal pedestal that places them above, right? They refuse to let go of that privilege. They refuse to call it privilege, and they call it internalized misogyny instead. And so they refuse to, they refuse to take out their internalized misogyny. They love that internalized misogyny. It makes them whole, okay? And that's why don't we see more house husbands? Why not?
Women become whole people by being out in the world. We all have the same circle of human qualities, but some are masculine over here and some are feminine over here. So progress is in the direction you haven't been, so to speak. Trying to
Bell Hooks has another
this full
good critique here
of human qualities. Not in, and we know that if a man takes care of a baby or a small child, the oxytocin increases in his brain.
See, Gloria has been trained by the CIA and her naturalistic arguments. Oxytocin and testosterone.
Testosterone increases in her. We all have oxytocin and we all have testosterone, and a lot of it is the norms in the atmosphere, which we can change. We can change. Look, the human beings have the longest infancy of any animal, I believe, because our heads are so big that we can't be born as developed as other animals are. So if 85% of our brain, something like that, develops outside the womb, we are incredibly subject to the influences around us. That's both the good news and the bad news. It depends what the influences are.
Well, it's interesting because just being here in the West Village and wandering around, and you see all these white men that are parenting, quote, and you recognize, and I'm not trying to mock that. You see the tenderness, the gentleness that many of them are showing to their children, but they're not more gentle in the world.
Okay, so the laugh. What was the laugh? The laugh was that they're not doing enough, that they're not doing enough emotional labor in the household. What is that laugh? That laugh needs to be analyzed. Okay? I'm a male teacher. I've been doing emotional labor work for my whole life. I've been taking on the emotional labor of women my whole life. How many women? That laugh is disgusting. Okay? I understand this idea of men are never do enough. But men have different priorities. Okay? They did a study about how even in anarchist and progressive communes where men have a once a week sitting with women about their patriarchal attitudes, even in those households where there's constant vigilance regarding patriarchy, even in those households, men do less housework. But who defines? Okay, who defines it? Is because these people who do the studies have particular priorities. Men and women have different priorities. Okay? There's a good reason why even in the most insane, patriarchal, even the most vigilant communes, that men fail in their household duties. It's because they have different priorities. And as long as men are not able to speak about this because of this power equals privilege bullshit narrative, prescriptive intersectionality.
You know, when he drops off his wonderful little adored girl and goes to Wall Street, or many of those places of supreme violence in our world right now, his having parented doesn't seem to have changed.
We don't know that. We don't know that.
We know that from the impact, Gloria.
See, Gloria is her whole fucking her whole fucking reason for existence, what's that Latin term, is to defend that CIA, Wall Street, top 1% men, okay? See, the CIA is really intelligent, right? The CIA realized a long time ago that they shouldn't go head to head with, the Black Panthers and the left wing, all of these people. What they did instead was they infiltrated the ideologies, the educational structures, the academic structures. The CIA doesn't play games. Okay, they know how to do the long-term colonialism, all right? They know how to take over, and Gloria Steinem is their chief operator with regards to feminism.
No, we don't. I mean, we know from all the studies of men who parent more, are more equal partners, that they're less violent. I mean,
Yeah, but your idea of violence is different from what Bell Hooks is using. Bell Hooks has a good here intersectional analysis of violence, which is that those men who work in Wall Street are exploiting massive amounts of surplus labor. Okay? And why do men feel that they need to exploit massive amounts of surplus labor through the use of economies of scale? It's because their worth as a human being is stuck on their utility. And this is something that feminism refuses to take up. Go ask feminists in your life. Is judging a man based on the size of his wallet a form of objectification, a form of seeing the other as a means to an end or not? You will get laughed at. Okay, how many times have I gotten canceled for all of these types of arguments?
No, we know that. But I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying the influence of the world doesn't come down upon Wall Street and so on. But we know we can have an influence in that way. Was your father a nurturing father?
No, he was a patron.
Look at that. Look at how smart she is, how she moves. There was another aspect of conflict where they could have really duked it out, and instead, Gloria is a fucking genius in terms of how she manipulates even the intelligent brain, the intelligent critical mind of Bell Hooks to move into these realms. I don't know if Gloria is actively doing this, consciously doing this, but she's a fucking genius.
Patriarchal terrorist. Oh, that word, that gets me into trouble.
We used to have the ladies dining in terrorist society we had to get up to.
Well, I was reminded that one of my goddaughters had called me up when she was 8, and she was like, look, my mother is a terrorist, and you need to do something about this. You need to talk with her. And I was actually thinking about the Bush administration and how the Bush administration changed all our ways of thinking about the word terrorist. That when it became this overly charged word, this word that would only have deeply negative, death-oriented applications. And not, its basic meaning of the evocation of dread or extreme fear. And it seems to me in that sense our relationship to the word has become very conservatized. And then participating in that conservatization, we collude in those forms of imperialism that see any person of color who is in an act of resistance as potentially a terrorist. Okay.
Besides, it's a... So that's what I mean about kids. Kids are saying it's not fair, right? And going around the campus of Columbia and Barnard carrying a mattress on her back as a...
So now she's talking about Mattress Girl, and she was outed as a liar.
The performance piece of suffering and what happened, and so it's fascinating.
A performance piece for vicarious traumatization.
Because it
but
is.
Columbia has not kicked out her sexual assailant.
But yes, because Columbia, her sexual assailant is still on campus.
The guy was found to be innocent.
I think that obviously consciousness comes first, and then remedies and so on. So we've known this for a long time. There have been Take Back the Night margin. I mean, we've been working at this for a long time, but I think now that Title IX is being used to actually threaten campuses with taking money away if they don't address this, which is very helpful. There's a higher consciousness, and also parents are beginning to understand. I mean, campuses were afraid that parents wouldn't bring put their daughters on campus if they had a high rate.
So she's talking about Title IX and financial investments but the problem is that these financial grants systems, and I'm going to make this point with regards to another thing.
Inching forward.
Said it. You have to educate for critical consciousness. That is the only way so that people can understand the role that they play. And we know from a lot of the teaching to transgress that's happening in prisons that men are capable of understanding.
So both Title IX and the Duluth model, what they do is they create inauthentic. You think that the guys in prison who are given, they aren't repeating the rhetoric. The people who have gone through the prison system, they repeat the rhetoric. They say whatever needs to be said to not go back to prison. It's insane. Same with the Title IX grant people. Okay? It's an inauthentic. It normalizes inauthentic virtue signaling as a form of either getting grant money or either not going into prison. These type of institutional ways of solving the problem of sexism, racism, all of these things don't actually solve the problem. What they do is they further entrench these problems into the shadows. It's really dangerous. It's really scary.
Begin to galvanize the most leading feminists to address the corporatization of schools, the poverty in schools. That's where it's going to begin. How can we begin to address violence? The way we're going to get rid of violence is by starting K through 12 talking.
And so finally, I want to end with where I left off, which is, again, this teacher who feels so strongly about her position. These traumatized people that have taken over our pedagogical systems, our psychological systems, our judicial systems, all of these people have, what they've done is, again, this problem of dirty hands, the political problem of dirty hands. Go to the Wikipedia page, read that. They've made the narcissists and the sociopaths and the most evil people allowed to sift through. Okay, stop bringing this shit into our K through 12 education. I'm a teacher. Okay, this shit's, you have to, the way you teach it is not through critical race theory. Okay, and that prescriptive intersectionality is quite dangerous. It's insane. Stop with the complicity, people. Get a hold of your trauma. Okay, relax. Listen to the people that you disagree with. That's what Dave Chappelle was all about. He's like, I know exactly what the feminist movement needs. A strong male leader. Oh my God. Thank you for taking the time to listen, or doing your duty to listen to that which you disagree with. All the best.